Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Parkside Merchant channel. We're at it again here with another installment in our series here, basically going through the first 11 sets of the vintage Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, going through my top 10 favorite cards from each set, and we're now all the way up to Invasion of Chaos, which is pretty remarkable. Over the past weeks, we've basically gone through all the other sets up to this point, so... Invasion of Chaos. So, good set, in my opinion. Actually, one of the best, probably, from Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of people, when you think vintage Yu-Gi-Oh!, Invasion of Chaos is not the first set that most people, wouldn't come to mind first. You'd hear about other stuff that usually gets people's attention, for the most part. So, it's kind of a, I don't know, it's a lesser area of focus, I think, for a lot of collectors. Probably a little bit underrated. And it does have quite a few good cards. This was actually a pretty tough set for me to go through and decide which ones were my favorite. So I think without further ado, I'll just go ahead and dive in here. As always, I'm not really ranking these according to any specific framework or any kind of criteria. I'm just kind of going through the sets one by one here and just deciding, in hindsight, from a collector's perspective, what were the cards that I valued the most from each of these sets in terms of artwork, a little bit of playability, a little bit of value, kind of a whole mixture of different things that I'm trying to decide how to prioritize them. So we'll start off here with our first card, Blasting the Ruins. I liked this card basically because I liked the artwork, number one. I was always very interested in history as a kid, and blasting the ruins, right? It's like if you're a kid, you're thinking, why would you do that? You know, if you've got like ancient ruins and stuff, who would want to destroy that kind of stuff? You'd want to like study it or preserve it or put it in museums or whatever. So I was always a little confused by what the point of like blasting the ruins would be. But then in addition to that, the card actually had kind of a funny effect to it that I always remembered as a kid, which was potentially a very definitive effect, depending on where a duel was at and how things were going. So I do remember keeping these occasionally in some of the decks that I used back in whenever this was, 2003 or 2004 or whatever. Okay, next up we have Balloon Lizard. I have this in here more as kind of just a comedy card. I always found this kind of funny as a kid. I think I talked about this in a different video that I did about the 50 most absurd or silly artworks in Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, this is just silly. It's like a puffer fish or like some kind of a balloon, basically, that's in the shape of a turtle or like a lizard or some kind of a creature. So I just always thought it was a funny artwork. Not really any other reason other than the artwork that I kind of liked this one, but it makes my top 10 for the most memorable items from this set, just because this one certainly stood out when I was a kid. Okay, number 8, kind of a similar reason I have this one featured, like the Balloon Lizard. I mean, get a load of this artwork. This is just so comical. It's like a gorilla that's basically got like the dragon fire, you know, like how dragons breathe fire sometimes. I think that's kind of what they were trying to go for with this. I don't know, just a fun, it's just funny. Like if you were, anybody that collected this stuff a long time ago certainly remembers this card because it was such a standout thing among all the other stuff that they have in Yu-Gi-Oh! Next up, another standout card, actually, the Black Tarano. Here's the deal on this thing. So, dragon cards are a dime a dozen in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's tons of dragons. Blue Eyes, White Dragon. Red Eyes, Black Dragon. You got the Luster Dragons. Luster Dragon 1, Luster Dragon 2. You got Yamada Dragons. You got all kinds of dragons. Chaos Emperor Dragons, all these different dragons. Dragons are a dime a dozen in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! When it comes to dinosaurs, something that kids like a lot sometimes, and in my particular case, I was a big dinosaur fan when I was young, this thing stood out, right? It was a pretty powerful dinosaur card. And somebody will probably correct me because there was probably some tournament pack or something that had like a dinosaur in it. So I'm not saying that there was no such thing as dinosaurs in Yu-Gi-Oh! Prior to this card. But if you wanted to have like a nice, shiny dinosaur that had big stats and was something that was just, you know, just big and memorable and looked like a T-Rex, this was your card. And I think for a lot of people, it was a big favorite for that reason. So makes my top 10 pretty easy for Invasion of Chaos. Next up here, we have Robin Zombie. I don't know what it is about this card. I remember playing it when I was a kid. I don't know if it was really that good in hindsight. I'm reading the effect again. It's kind of an okay card. It was a rare. I feel like just one of those things that I always remembered pretty well for some reason. The artwork was kind of eerie, memorable. And for me, it's just one of those things, for whatever reason, it's one of the cards that I remembered very distinctly from this particular set. So I guess that's about it for this card. Okay, next up, we're going down to our top 5 now for Invasion of Chaos. We've got the Chaos Emperor Dragon. Probably not a surprise this made my top 5. Very cool card, great artwork. It's got some of the anime series stuff going for it in its favor, on top of the fact that it's like pretty rare, good stats. I mean, this was clearly like a pretty big card from the set, and for self-explanatory reasons, I think it makes my top 5. I don't really have any special affinity to it. It didn't really show its head, I think, in the series until pretty late in the anime anyway, so it wasn't like it had that sort of OG level attachment for me, like the blue eyes or the red eyes or Jinzo and all that other stuff. So cool card. I appreciate it. But it's not my favorite from this set. Okay, next up we've got Dark Magician of Chaos. I like this card a lot. Very cool artwork. Very interesting take on kind of the whole magician angle. You know, you got all these dark magicians, and you got all these paladins and all these different iterations and Buster Bladers and things that there's all kinds of different combos and such that you can mix and match and spin these artworks and such throughout the series. But this thing was cool, right? It was definitely a card that I remembered. Just a good artwork. Iconic card, essentially, from Invasion of Chaos. I don't have much else to say about it. I don't have any like special affinity to it or anything like that. And it wasn't quite as nostalgic as the Dark Magician Girl, Buster Blader, Dark Paladin, right? Some of these other things. So it's cool. Is it my favorite of all the magicians and all these spellcaster cards and such? No, not necessarily, but I like it a lot, and I probably like this one a little bit more than the Chaos Emperor Dragon. Now, the next card that you're going to see here is the Dedication Through Light and Darkness. Now, you may wonder, well, how could this be a more attractive card for you than the Dark Magician of Chaos? I think it was just an artwork thing. I liked the way this looked better than the way this looked. Plain and simple. I thought this was a cooler looking image to have on a card, and it always stood out pretty well in the binder. This was one of those foils that really had a pop to it, as I recall, so it would always stand out. And there's a handful of cards like that, but this was certainly one of them for me, that when you're flipping through your binder, this always was something that you took a close look at because it just stood out really well. Okay, number 2 is next here, folks. We've got the Orca Mega Fortress of Darkness. I mean, what can you say, right? You got a whale, it's got like a fortress on it, it's like a submarine. It's got like a little submarine that's like riding underneath it or next to it. I'm pretty sure that Mako Tsunami used this in that big duel with Joey Wheeler in the Battle City tournament where he played like a whole bunch of stuff. The Legendary Fisherman. There's another whale card that looks a lot like this one, except that particular whale is like a different type of whale. And it's like a fusion monster, or like I think it's a ritual summon or something like that. So it's a different looking card. Maybe that was the Mako Tsunami one. Maybe this one was also the same one. I honestly don't really remember. But in either case, I mean, if you had any Invasion of Chaos cards when you were a kid and you had this card, you definitely remembered the Orca, right? I mean, you can't forget a card like this. It's such a silly artwork. And it's just a fun monster and something I always associated with the fish cards. And I like fish cards a lot. I'm a big fan of the Legendary Fisherman and several of the other aquatic creatures that came along over the course of the series. So for that reason, it makes my top 5, and it's my number 2 favorite card from Invasion of Chaos. Now, you may ask, what the heck is the number 1 card that the Parkside Merchant has from this set? And this is one of the few sets, I think, that I've done, and there may be 1 or 2 others. I know Labyrinth of Nightmare was another example of this. There are some sets where my favorite card is actually a common from the set, and This is one of those sets. And you might say, what? Like, there's so much great stuff in this set. And there is. I'm not saying that all these other cards aren't cool or things that I like or cards that I value. But it just, in my particular case, there's something about the big koala that I just really enjoy as a card. Why the big koala, you may ask? Well, number one, I had several copies of it. So it was something that I had as a kid. It was something that I remembered from my youth. Definitely one of the most memorable cards from the set for me. And when you think about what it is that makes cards memorable and gives them nostalgia power for kids, it's either typically the card stands out for some reason. Typically that's because it's used in the anime series, or it's a very playable card that they beat a lot of people with, or it was a very rare card or something like that that makes it stand out. In this case, it was none of those factors. It wasn't really used on the show at all, to my recollection. It was never that rare. Everybody had a copy if you had Invasion of Chaos packs. And it wasn't even really that good of a card back in the day. There was a whole bunch of other stuff people would rather have in their decks than the big koala. But I think why it stood out to me was plain and simple. It was unusual. Nobody really knew the story behind it because it wasn't like a Yugi card or a Joey card or like something that a rare hunter used or something like that. There was no backstory to this thing. It was just this huge koala bear with huge stats and just a funny artwork, right? I mean, you remember huge stats when you're young. A lot of these huge stat cards stand out in these sets. Garnecia Elephantis is another example of this from the Metal Raiders set, right? It's cards that just have huge stats sometimes stand out, even if they're not that playable. And so for me, it was just a fun card because I liked the artwork. I thought it was kind of funny. Had some mystery to it because nobody really knew what the whole story was around it. And it's just, to me, a very memorable artifact from my collection of the Invasion of Chaos cards that I had at the time. So that's all here for this video, folks. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm sure people are going to have very different opinions on this set than I do. So let me know, what were your favorite cards from Invasion of Chaos? How would you have maybe reordered some of the stuff that I had here? What did I miss? Always interested to hear what people have to say about some of these sets. And this is a set that I happen to like quite a bit. And it's one of my favorites from the vintage era. So that's all here for today's video, folks. Thanks again for watching. This is the Parkside Merchant channel, and we'll see you next time.